In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the alternator on this Nissan Pathfinder. Just so you know, for this job, we will have to pull the radiator and AC condenser. So having said that, you want to get your refrigerant professionally evacuated from the system. You do not want to open any AC lines with the system still pressurized. So let's get started. I'm going to remove this shield that's in the way here. To remove this, just take out all the push clips that hold this on. You can use a trim tool. A lot of these could break, well, just like that. If you have to replace them, well, make sure you have some on hand to replace them. Just go around. All right, now with this shield off, you'll notice two holes here, which we'll need to access this one. So the one that's towards the middle, not this one. And you can technically access this through the shield also, but we will need the shield off, so that's why I chose to remove that first. This is where we will be draining the coolant. So as you just saw, I have a collection bucket ready to catch it. You'll need a Phillips head screwdriver, a large one. Stick it in here and just unscrew the plug. Make sure that you're out of the way because coolant will want to come straight down as it's ready. And once you feel that you're on the last thread, just let go and it should drip down. Now, I did not open the radiator cap or anything like that yet. So right now it's basically pulling a vacuum. As you can see, it's not dripping very fast. So let's lower the vehicle, unless you're already on the ground, and pull the radiator cap off to release more coolant and allow it to drain faster. Now I'm going to remove this shield because we have to anyway. I know you can access the radiator cap right here. You're gonna have a bunch of push clips that go all the way around. So grab a trim tool, pop the center out, and then pull the rest of the trim clip up and out, and just go around and remove all of them. With all of them removed, you can lift this piece right up and out. Now, remove the radiator cap, turn it counterclockwise. This will release the coolant. Now we have to remove this bracket here to basically make space to pull things away. And in order to do that, I'm going to start by disconnecting the hood latch cable. The hood latch I'm actually going to leave on the radiator support, so I'm just going to disconnect the cable, that way it doesn't get damaged at all. The easiest way to do this is to pinch these two tabs here, or you can press them in with a trim tool, screwdriver, whatever you have. Once you press these in, you should be able to slide the cable through, just like that, and then unhook it. Since we're here, let's remove this 8mm headed bolt. And then looking towards the front, where this release lever is, you'll have two 13mm bolts to remove. This will allow us to get this bracket off of here, which will actually provide enough clearance for us to get right down here and remove this bracket. It's a little bit difficult to see down here. If you want to, you can pull the grill away. It should have a couple clips at the top. Mine are broken, so it easily pulls away. But you have two 10mm bolts right here that need to be removed. There's the bracket, and try not to lose the bolt down there. There's the bolt, well, both of them. Set this aside. Using some pliers, pull this clamp away so we can unhook the overflow hose. This a lot of times gets stuck here. You can twist it very gently with the pliers, but be very careful not to damage anything. We are obviously reusing this, so set this aside. If you want to, you can pull this through, although it is not necessary, so I'm going to leave it here. Holding the radiator and the AC condenser, they're bolted together, is an 8mm bolt here on this bracket. Remove this, pull the bracket away, and do the same to the other side. Same bracket, same bolt. Now I want to remove the 8mm bolt holding the AC condenser onto the radiator so I can separate the two. There's one on each side. Now this should be able to pull away. Perfect. Now with the brackets off, we can push the radiator back and access the clamp that holds the upper radiator hose in place. The easiest thing is to just grab some pliers, squeeze it, pull it backwards, and remove the upper radiator hose. I was able to lock it in the open position, so this actually allows me to move it without holding it with pliers or just directly pull the radiator hose off. However, be very careful. If you have your finger here and this snaps back shut, it's going to hurt. So give this a twist, pull the hose back, we go. You can just leave this right here. Back underneath, I'm gonna cap the radiator off, put the drain plug back in, make it nice and snug. Don't make it too tight though, it just has an O-ring that seals up. Once you get it snug, it should stop dripping. Basically, now that it's pretty much almost fully drained, I wanna stop it from dripping so I can work underneath without it getting all over the place. Put down anything that still remains here so you can avoid it dripping on you. Now let's disconnect the lower hose, which you can easily access from underneath. Of course, this will also cause coolant to come out, so make sure you have a collection bucket ready. Even though it's fully drained, there's a lot of times still more coolant on the hose. Pinch the hose clamp with some pliers, slide it back. It should technically lock in the open position. A lot of times these will not, just as they get rustier, they lose their locking mechanism, but it looks like this one still works. I have my collection bucket ready, and I'm gonna get this hose to break free. There we go. Pull it backwards and let the rest of this drain. Now let's pull the transmission cooler lines off of the bottom of the radiator. To get those off, you can just grab some pliers, and based on where your clamp is located, you can either get them right through the bottom, or you'll have to go over the subframe and grab them from the top. That's what I have to do for this one. I'm gonna try and twist this clamp. There we go. Now I can grab it properly and pull it away. Remove the hose. When you remove the hose, make sure you have a collection bucket to catch all of the transmission fluid that will leak out. There will be some. Now this vehicle has not run in a while, so there may not be as much as there should be if it just drove in, but of course there still is some. I'm going to take a little plug the hose. If you don't have something like this, you could pinch the hose, just be careful not to damage it, but this will stop the fluid from leaking. The less you let leak out, the less you'll have to fill back up at the end. Towards the driver's side is going to be your other transmission cooler hose. I'm going to try to get this one with some needle nose pliers. There we go. All right, pull this one off as well. This one will also leak, and I'm going to try to cap it off with this. I got this capped off with just a random plug I had laying around. I like to keep these rubber and plastic plugs that come on different parts for this purpose. Like I said, you can always pinch the hoses, but it's not the best idea to do that. You can damage them. Towards the driver's side, you'll see this electrical connector here. Press on the tab and let's disconnect it. There we go. On the passenger side, this is going to be pretty difficult to see. There is a bolt that holds on this bracket that holds on both of these lines onto the AC condenser. It's a 10mm headed bolt. We have to remove said bolt. Doing that will allow us to pull the lines away. You'll need a deep socket or a short socket with an extension to actually get there. Mine was actually very tight, so I had to switch to a bigger ratchet just to break it free. Once it's free, you should be able to remove it. Now with a vacuum pulled on the system, now with the system evacuated, at the end the machine should pull a vacuum. So when you disconnect the first line, you may hear a hissing noise. Don't be alarmed because that is not pressure, that is vacuum. So once you have this bolt out, you should be able to remove this bracket, and unless they're stuck, the lines should want to pop out of the AC condenser. There we go. You can set these lines aside. On the back side of this radiator support, if you just follow the AC lines, you'll see where they join into this connector right here. With a 10mm socket, you can remove that bolt. Perfect, fell on the ground. I'll get that in a second. But now you can separate this bracket here and separate these lines that go through the radiator support so you can get more movement in them. Once you get it unbolted, if you're having trouble separating it, you can usually stick a screwdriver right here and very gently pry these apart. There we go. That's one line. This line is broken free, it just doesn't want to slide out very easily. There we go. I always recommend replacing any O-rings on AC systems every time you move them or disconnect the line. Regardless, you want to be careful with them. Now you can pull the lines out through the front And this gives you quite a bit more space to work with here with the AC condenser. Now you should be able to pull the AC condenser right up and out. And this gives us space to remove the radiator, which has to slide quite a bit forward. Once you find the right angle, you can pull it straight up. There's the radiator. Now we have to remove this air intake piece. To do that, there are two 10mm bolts, one on each end of it. You can see one right over here. The other one is symmetrically on the other side. With the other side removed, it's right here, you can pull this up and out. Now with that air intake off, we're going to have to remove the battery as well as the battery tray. To do that, I'm going to start by disconnecting this bracket here that holds the battery hold down onto the computer here. It's a 10mm bolt over here. Actually, all of these fasteners are going to be 10mm. This you'll have to completely unbolt. This you don't necessarily have to unbolt. That bracket can stay attached. And now I'm going to take out these two 10mm nuts. Okay, that J-hook fell on the ground. That's fine. This one will stay in the vehicle. This one should have also stayed, but it looks like it fell. Now you can remove this piece, set it aside. Now we have to disconnect the two battery terminals. I'm going to start with the negative. This is a 10mm nut that holds the negative nice and tight on here. Loosen that up, pull the negative terminal right up and off. Set it aside so it cannot make connection until we've removed the positive. 10mm nut also on the positive. Loosen this up. Looks like we have an extra wire here, so I'm going to have to remove that. If you don't have this wire, you don't have to take that mounting nut all the way off. Unfortunately, I do. Now you can remove the whole terminal, set that aside, and now the battery should be ready to come right up and off. Be careful, it's heavy. I'm going to take this insulation out of here. It's very dusty, be careful. Now take the plastic tray out. Let's unplug all of these connections for the main engine's computer. Press on that little tab. Flip this up. As you flip this up, it should push the connector away. There we go. Now be very careful and gentle with these. Okay, set them aside. And there are 4 in total. Okay, now there's a 10mm mounting nut at the top here. You don't have to completely remove it. You do have to completely remove this one on the bottom though. Okay, take that one out. This one at the top is slotted, so you can pull this computer down and out, set it aside safely. Let's take this bolt out also. Disconnect that bracket. Okay, that's off. Let's unbolt these two 13mm bolts. There's also a smaller computer right on the back side here. It's the same style. Push up on this lever, or pull up on this lever until it clicks, and that will unlock the whole connector for you. There we go. Okay, so let's follow this bracket along. This one's a little trickier to see. There's a bolt right here. Let's take this one out as well. It's a 13mm. If you push this positive terminal aside, there's going to be one last 13mm bolt down there. Let's take this one out as well. Okay. I will show you exactly how to do this once it's off, but I can barely see it right now. You have to stick a pocket screwdriver back here and unclip this harness off of a retainer. Okay, once this is off, and once again I will show you in a second exactly how to do this, you should be able to unlodge this entire bracket. So this is what that looks like. It has a little cutout right there, and on the harness you have this clip right here that has a tab in the middle. So basically you have to go from behind it, push that tab through so that instead of it locking into the cutout, it pushes through, and then you can release the whole bracket. Now let's take out these 3 13mm mounting bolts that are left so we can take out the battery tray. We have a clip to undo over there. Grab a trim tool and pop it out. There we go. Take this tray out. Now let's continue with the tray removal here, this bracket for the tray. We need to get this wiring harness off of the tray, and it's held on with two 10mm bolts right down here. It's pretty difficult to see. I'm gonna stick my ratchet down here with a 10mm socket. Try to get these off of here. I was able to get one. See if I can get the second one. There's the second one. Now we can move this bracket for the wiring harness, and then there are going to be two 13mm bolts, one over here, that we have to take out. All right. Okay. There's the bolt, and finally we can remove this bracket. Now I'm going to remove the upper radiator hose from right over here. It's just going to make it a lot easier to have it out of the way completely. Grab some pliers, squeeze the clamp. This one will lock into place, and then you can grab the radiator hose, twist it, and pull it away. We also have to pop it off of this retainer over here, and for this all you need is a flathead screwdriver just to pry down on this little tab. Get this out of the way. Now let's unplug this electrical connector for the fan assembly. This is the brains of it, and this is the main power supply. If you just press on that tab, this one right here, it should unlock this. You can pull this up and out. There are only two bolts at this point holding this fan assembly on. They're both T30 headed bolts. Put your socket in here, make sure it's seated well, and remove these bolts. There's one here and one on the other side. Someone has replaced mine on this side with a Phillips head, so that's what I'm going to use. Now I need to remove this control module. Whether you unplug it or just let it hang, that's up to you. I'm going to unplug it just because I want it completely out of my way. Looks like the tab for this connector is on the back side here. So I'm going to have to wait to disconnect that. Use a 10mm socket or ratchet to remove these bolts that hold the control module in place. And the reason we have to do this is because otherwise it will not clear the front valve cover as you try to pull it up. And one down here. Okay, this can now come off. And I know it's hard to see, but I'm trying to unplug that bottom connector. There we go. Okay, so now with this off, now we can pull up on this assembly. It should slide right out. And there it is. Now we can work through the opening that we just created, and this is where we're going to have to get to the alternator from now on. You can see right there is the regulator connector, and then this is the main power wire right here underneath this boot. I'm going to start with removing this boot and then pulling the main power wire off of here. It's very difficult to see, but right there is the mounting nut. Pretty much the only thing I can get on it is going to be a wrench. I'm going to use a 12mm wrench for this. Just try to break this free. There we go. It shouldn't be very tight. Once you do break it free, you should be able, as long as it's not very corroded, which this one is not at all, you should be able to pull it off by hand. We're going to want to remove this all the way so we can then pull the main wire off. There it is. Pull this right up and out now. There we go. I just grabbed it with a pick so I could basically pull upwards on it, and that released it, so that's good. And now we're left with the connector for the regulator. Now I'm going to take the same pick that I just used, press on this tab. That's the best way that I'm going to be able to get to it. Basically you have to press on this. That'll unlock the connector, and you can pull it up. There we go. You hear that click. That's how you know it's unlocked. Now if you follow this wiring harness up, you can see right here, it'll be connected to a bracket. I'm going to want to pull this, you're going to want to pull this retainer off of the bracket so we can actually move the wiring harness out of the way of the alternator as we try to remove the alternator. Here's our two connectors that we just unplugged. Now you have a little bit more slack on this, so that's good. Use a 21mm socket and remove all 5 of your lug nuts so we can remove the wheel. Let's remove 4 push clips to get this splash shield out of the way so we can gain access to everything. Using a combination of some trim tools to get these pried out of here. There we go. These right here are different. You're gonna have to pop out the center. These are often stuck from sand buildup. Looks like this one broke, so I'm gonna have to install a new one. That happens often too. There we go, that one broke too, so 2 new ones, but the shield is off. Now we have to take the belt off. You can use a 3/8 drive tool, breaker bar, ratchet, serpentine belt tool, whatever you have, and turn this counterclockwise. Once you spin the tensioner counterclockwise, you should be able to pull the belt off of something, whatever pulley you can reach first. I'm going to try and get it off of the harmonic balancer, because if I take it off the tensioner, I can't really put it anywhere. My ratchet's in the way. There we go. Now you can release this, get this out of here. You can just kind of set it aside here. I'm just going to show you at the end how to put it back on. I might as well get it out of my way at this point. Get a 13mm tool in here, wrench or socket. A wrench will fit better. And break this bolt free. There are 2, one on this side and one on the other side of this tensioner. Remove this. The other 13mm bolt is to the right. You can see it right here. It's very difficult to show once my hands are in there, but get a wrench up there and you should be able to get it out. You have just enough room for a wrench on this one. Oh, as you can see, the tensioner wants to pivot now. Okay, there we go. Now the bolt will stay with the tensioner. Slide this out this way. Here's the second bolt. Now with the tensioner out of the way, you can see this 14mm mounting nut here. We're gonna have to pull this off. This is one of the mounting points for the alternator. There we go. It's got a long through bolt that goes all the way to the other side. However, it does have a little tab on it which will hold it. So you don't have to hold the other side. You just take off the nut. The bolt should stay in place. There it is right there. Now we have to tap the bolt through. All right, looks like it wasn't stuck. Sometimes they seize in there. And now from right underneath where the exhaust is, right over the AC compressor, you can see that bolt. That's the one that we just pushed out. So reach up for it. We'll just have to pull it out the rest of the way. There we go. Now we have to remove this bolt right here that holds the alternator onto that bracket. It's a 12mm headed bolt. Break it free and remove it the rest of the way. Okay, set it aside safely. Now we actually have to follow this bracket up and take the bracket off of the engine side. It is basically impossible even for me to see where that bolt is, but I can feel it. So what I'm going to do is put my hand in here with a wrench. The bolt is basically right up there. Once again, I can't even see it, so I'm just going to give you a view from up here, which is basically all I can see also. Okay, so I got it out. As the bracket comes off, it does have a wire that's attached to it, which you can either pull off or just push the bracket to the side. Sometimes it's more or less stuck. Just depends on corrosion and everything. This one is not too bad, so I'm just trying to wiggle it free at this point. Looks like I'm gonna have to pull this hose off so I can actually pull the alternator out. If you just follow the hose, you'll see this hose clamp right here. This is the one that I'm gonna take off. It's easier to take off the top at this point than it would be to take off the bottom of the hose. Pull the hose clamp away. There we go. All right. Now we just have to get this wire out of the way. Try to find the best direction to pull this alternator out. Just has to fit between all these things here, which it does. You just have to maneuver it the right way. Oh, there we go. Take it out through the top. And there's your alternator. Now let's take the new alternator and slide it down. As you do this, of course, make sure you're facing it the right way. And I'm going to attempt to slide it down the same exact direction that it came in through so that I can actually match it up. You'll have to kind of squeeze it past this lower radiator hose. There we go. Now I'm going to twist it in place just like this, and unfortunately I don't have the bracket ready, and this rear bolt here is difficult to access from up top. So try to line it up the best you can. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this front bracket on and try to bolt it onto the front. That way it can pivot on that. Then I'll go underneath, and all I have to do then is lift it and slide the bolt through. If you go the other way and put the rear bolt in first, it'll kind of move around all over the place, and it's more difficult to line that up from underneath. Okay, here's that bracket. I think I found the threads on the bolt, or the hole where the bolt goes through. I'm going to tighten this up, and it doesn't adjust. It only has one position. So once you get it snug, you'll see that it'll stop pivoting. Now, it does pivot just a little bit, so what you want to do is pull it up all the way, or forward, however you want to see that. And once you have it pulled this way, you can hold it from the top easily, and then hopefully you can get your ratchet in there, snug it up. There's no way I can fit a torque wrench in here, so I'm just going to go with nice and snug. It's just a small bolt. You don't want to break it or strip out the threads, but as long as it's snug, it's good to go. So now we can put the one on the alternator on so we can actually line up the rest of it. So this is going to be the tricky part now. You're going to need to hold it, and with your other hand, try to get the bolt through. Okay, there we go. I know it's difficult to see, but I got it in. It's started. Now I'm just going to bring it close with my wrench. I'm not going to tighten it. I'm just going to bring it close so it stops wobbling around and it's somewhat secure. And now we can go underneath and put in the other bolt that goes in the rear. Now from underneath, you're going to want to push the alternator up and line it up with the engine right where the bolt goes through. And push that bolt through. Make sure this little tab on this side is lined up. Otherwise, it'll keep spinning as you try to tighten it. It's supposed to hold itself in place. And it looks like it's all lined up. Now you can grab the mounting nut and thread this on. Now with your 14mm socket, snug this mounting nut up. And the torque for this is 48 foot-pounds. Of course, make sure the top is properly positioned at this point. It should already be, but it's always good to double check. Once again, 48 foot-pounds. There we go. Now back up top, we can tighten this bolt over here. Make it snug. The torque for this is 21 foot-pounds. There it is. Now let's plug the alternator back in. I'm going to start with this connector because it's all the way in the back and the power wire actually covers it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I heard the click. You want to make sure it's locked in. Now, pull the boot off of this wire, and before you put it on, inspect it for corrosion. This one is actually very clean, so lift it up, and if there is already a mounting nut here, you're going to want to pull it off so that you can slide the wire on. Keep in mind it has these two tabs here that come off of the power wire. You have to make sure those line up with the two grooves on the plastic that surrounds the post. Now, put the mounting nut back on. When you tighten this, you want to make sure you don't over tighten it, otherwise it could damage the alternator internally. It can break this stud off, so I'm just going to make it snug. This new one is a 13mm. There we go, snug, and put the boot back on. That'll cover it, protect it from corrosion, or moisture, and prevent corrosion is what I meant. Back here we have the hose that we disconnected. Make sure you put that back on. Pinch that clamp, put that clamp on. Try to get it to line up as close as possible with where it was before. That's how you get it to seal up the best after it's been removed. Right there is perfect. The hose is bottomed out. Bring it in the same way that it came out. It's not going to be easy to find the spot, but once the bolt falls into place, be ready to thread it on so it can kind of stay in place there, just like this. All right, this is starting nicely. Make sure it's nice and smooth, because if it's cross-threading, then you'll have a problem. Not that you can really cross-thread it by hand, it would be difficult. But now that that's most of the way in, let's get this outer bolt on, or the left hand bolt on. And I don't want to tighten either of them until they're both started and most of the way bottomed out. Okay, let's get this one tightened up. Okay, this one's snugged up. Let's move back over to the other one and try to tighten that one as well. All right, this one's snug. There's no way I can get a torque wrench in there, so I'm gonna make this one nice and snug. Yep, there we go, just like that. Now let's tighten this outer one. I can't get a torque wrench on this one either. The torque for both of these is 18 foot-pounds, which just means nice and tight with a small ratchet or wrench. So I gave them about between an eighth and a quarter of a turn after they bottomed out. So that should be plenty tight at this point. Let's get the belt on. Now let's get the belt back on. Here's a diagram on the screen of the routing of the belt if you took it off, which a lot of times it does fall off doing this kind of work. So get it back onto the alternator at the top. I'm going to go down underneath the belt tensioner. Make sure it falls onto all the ribs properly on all the pulleys. Of course, other than the belt tensioner, which is not ribbed. AC compressor, there we go. And it looks like I need just a little bit more slack out of this belt to get it over the harmonic balancer, so that's fine. We would have to put a tool on this anyway. Get your 3/8 drive tool on the tensioner and pull counterclockwise. That releases it more. Slip the belt over, make sure it's seated. We can release tension. Before you take your ratchet away, feel the belt to make sure that it's on all the grooves of the pulleys, which it is, it's perfect. You definitely want to make sure you double check that, because if it's not, well, you're going to have some serious issues once you turn on the engine. Remove your tool and let's get the shield back on. Let's get the shield lined up. I have the 2 push clips that I can reuse. They did not break here at the top. There's one. And the other, a lot of times these do break, so make sure you have some extra ones on hand. There's one, and second one. There we go, let's put the wheel on. Put all 5 of your lug nuts on, starting by hand. And then in a cross pattern, you're gonna want to torque this to 83 foot-pounds. Once again, 83 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them. Now grab your fans, and of course with the control unit off of there, slide them down into position. They do have some rubber grommets at the bottom that need to seat into the core support. And of course, make sure you're not pinching any wires up here. To mount this, we had the 2, well, technically T30 Torx screws or bolts. I only have one because my other one is a Phillips head from someone having to replace it. I'm going to snug this up. Don't make it too tight. You don't want to break or crush anything. You just want to make sure it's snug. On the other side, I had the Phillips head screw, like I said, but you should also have a T30 Torx. Okay, that's tight. Resecure this harness while I'm here. Now we have to reconnect and resecure this motor in place. There are 2 fan connections. Make sure the connectors click. There we go. Tighten these up the best you can. Those are all tight. Let's plug in the main harness right here. Make sure this clicks. All right, click, it's locked in. Of course, make sure it's not in the way of the fan. It shouldn't be, but it's better to double check. Now I'm going to get my upper radiator hose reconnected to the engine side. Put that on. Carefully put this clamp on. If it's locked in the open position, you want to be careful because, like I said earlier, it'll hurt if it comes off. Okay, and the easiest way to release this, take a screwdriver, stick it in here, and pry basically up on this, down on this, and that releases that little tab. And of course, now if you wanted to adjust it, which I will, you can just grab it with pliers like you normally would and place it wherever it's best. Typically you want to be halfway between the end of the hose and the end of the fitting, which it is, so that's perfect. Right here there was a retainer for the hose. Click that back on so that it's out of the way of everything. All right, let's get the bracket that supports the battery tray back on. I'm going to start this front bolt in first because it's a little bit easier to reach. That way the bracket isn't trying to fall off while I put the rear bolt in. If you want to clean up the threads on these bolts, that's a good idea. Since they're hard to reach, it might be easier to thread them in. All right, there we go. Let's tighten these up. Make sure they're nice and snug. Now we have to put these two little 10 millimeters back that are basically impossible to see from this angle. You can see them on the other side, but it does not matter which one you start with. But whatever you do, don't tighten up the first one before you get the second one started. All right, so I got that first one started. You kind of have to feel for where they're trying to thread in. There we go. I got them both started, so let's snug them up. If you have a swivel socket, this will make things a whole lot easier. These are 10 millimeter in size. Now let's get this battery tray back in here. Make sure you're not pinching any wires in the process. Just like that. This ground wire was clipped on here just to secure it. One bolt over here, and one in the forward corner. Do not put any other ones in yet, especially this one, because the other ones hold on the main bracket. Snug all these up. Let's get this bracket back in here. Remember to clip it in on the wire over there. This rubber grommet also was here for the air box. You have to put the pin from the air box right in it, just like that. Okay, all the bolt holes should line up at this point. Make sure all of your wires are in the correct position, that they're not pinched, tangled, or not where they're supposed to be. I'm going to clip this wire in. All you have to do is hook it over and press it on, just like that. Now we can put these bolts back in. There are 4 of them. All right, let's snug them all up. Does not matter where you start. Get the computer reinstalled here. Actually, this one does not have to come off all the way. This mounting nut does. Take that off, slide the computer on down here, hook it onto the top first, and then over this bottom stud, put that mounting nut back. We'll tighten them both up. I'm going to tighten up this top one first just so it can stop moving around. It's easier to get to here. Just make it snug, don't crush it down. And then the bottom one. Okay, nice and snug. Now we have to plug in all the electrical connectors. I'm going to plug in the single one first on the smaller computer on the back side. Get that one situated, and it won't obviously plug in all the way by itself. You have to flip this tab over. That's what's going to lock it in. These here, not only are they color coded, but they also only reach and fit in one connector. So you can't really accidentally put them backwards, as you can see. I'm going to start with the lowest one. Get that slid in here, and then flip this over. That's going to pull it in and lock it. You definitely want to make sure these are all properly connected, otherwise there will be some serious electrical issues when you go to run the vehicle. There we go. And last one at the top. Okay, so all 4 are connected. This is bolted in. Now I'm going to put back the plastic battery tray, which has 3 little pins on the bottom. Those have to line up. And on the front side, you can see there's an arrow. The arrow is pointing towards the engine. So that's how you know how to line that up. Now, if you still have this insulation, go ahead and put it back. Now take the battery and drop it down here. Make sure this insulation stays out of the way and you're not crushing it with the battery. Pull the terminals away just so they don't interfere. This positive terminal wants to stay on here, so that's fine. My cap fell off. I'm going to put that back on. This vehicle had some extra fog light wiring here that I'm going to put back on. Make sure the terminal is bottomed out on the post of the battery. You want it to make a good connection. And take your 10mm tool of choice and snug this up. To tighten it properly, you just want to go until you can't spin this terminal anymore by hand. Otherwise, if you go way further past that, you could possibly stretch this and then it won't make a good connection. In the future, you'll damage it. So that's done, and same applies to the negative. When you plug in the negative, it may have a small spark. Put this back on, tighten this up. Same applies here. Just tighten it until you can't spin it by hand anymore. That's perfect right there. Now let's put the battery hold down in, hook this back on. Has a little tab that it hooks onto on the battery tray. There it is. I just got it situated. And then put this over. If you have a wire like this, make sure you don't pinch it down under. Make sure it goes over the battery hold down. I'm holding this hook, this rod, with one finger so it doesn't fall down. I'm going to start a mounting nut on it. That way it can stay on here. There we go. Now you can let go and you can start the other one. This is the tricky one because it wants to fall down all the time. Okay, let's do the same to this one over here. Got a 10mm socket, tighten these both up. You don't have to make them very tight, you just have to snug them up. Basically what you're looking for from this is to just hold down the battery, not to crush it. There we go. Get this bolt back in here, snug it up. If you haven't already, put this bolt back in that secures this plastic bracket for the wiring harness onto the bracket that holds the computer, and snug it up. Make sure you don't make it too tight. If you used a piece of rag, make sure you remove that. Now take your radiator, slide it in. As it gets towards the bottom, make sure that it seats into the rubber grommets that it needs to sit in. And of course, make sure all the ports go through the holes in the radiator support. Now take your AC condenser, carefully slide it down. It has 2 tabs on the bottom that need to slide into the radiator. Now take your lines that go through the core support, feed them back through. Line them up with the AC condenser if you want to at this point, or you can wait. It's always a good idea to lubricate the O-rings with some PAG oil. That's a special type of oil made for AC systems. When you put these in, don't force them. Make sure they slide in smoothly. That's why it's good to lubricate them a little bit, just like that. If you force them, you could tear the O-ring and, of course, damage the lines or the fitting or anything like that. You want to avoid that. And when it comes to connecting these lines over here, you want to do the same thing. Check the O-rings, lubricate if necessary, and make sure they line up properly before you tighten that bolt. There's one. All right, and 2. Put the bolt in. When you tighten this bolt, just make it snug. You want to let the O-rings do the sealing. If you crush it down, you could break it or strip the threads, and then you'll have a leak here, and then you'll have to replace more parts. So, there we go. Just make it nice and snug. That's all you need. Now it's time to put this bolt back in over here. This one's difficult to reach and difficult to see, and you want to make sure that it's lined up and not cross-threading. It should go in nice and smooth. If it's not, it's most likely cross-threading. And this being aluminum, it's easy to do that. So you want to make sure it's not, and that it holds on nice and tight. I know it's not completely bottomed out, that's fine. You don't want to pull them in the whole way with the bolt. So, make this nice and snug right there. That's perfect. Just like the other lines, you want to let the O-ring do the sealing, not the tightness of the bolt. So as long as it's tight, nice and snug, you're good to go. Once the lines are in, get this AC condenser lined up, put the bolt through. This was the 8mm headed bolt, and snug it up. Before you finish tightening up that side, make sure you put this one in also. That way you make sure that they're both seated. Now that they're both in, you can tighten them both up. Nice and snug, and you can go back to the other side, snug that side up as well. Once it gets snug, stop. You don't want to break anything or strip the fitting out. And now we can finally reconnect this piece. From underneath, let's try to get the lower radiator hose reconnected onto the radiator now. Make sure it's seated all the way on. There we go, right there. And to release this clamp, you can stick a screwdriver in here and just pop it. And of course, if you need to adjust it, you can do so with some pliers at this point. Just make sure it's seated pretty much right in the middle between the end of the hose and the end of the fitting, which is right about here. That's perfect. Now let's get the transmission cooler line or hose reconnected. I'm gonna take this plug out of here that I put, and I'm gonna immediately put it onto the radiator right there. There we go. Grab that clamp and slide it over. There we go, right there. And the other transmission cooler hose, also somewhat difficult to see. And, quickly plug it up and put the clamp on. There we go. All right. Now let's get this shield back on here and re-secure it with all of its push clips. Get the upper radiator hose reattached to the radiator. Careful with that clamp. Make sure that this overflow hose isn't getting pinched here. That hose is bottomed out all the way. Let's grab a screwdriver and release that clamp. That's good right there. I don't even need to adjust it. Make sure this hose is running along where it's supposed to. Put this hose back on the radiator, and let's bring the clamp over and put that right there. Take the brackets that hold the radiator, put those back on. These had an 8mm headed bolt, and same on this side. Now let's put this bracket back on. This had the two 10mm bolts right down here. Before I tighten those two up, I'm going to line this one up and start it in. This will basically allow me to position it perfectly. I'm going to tighten this one up first. This is the 8mm headed one. And the two 10s. And finally, these two right here for the safety release for the hood, two 13mm headed bolts. Let's connect the cable, hook the ball in, and then pull this out all the way. This should be able to slide down in here, just like that, and then through. Now take this piece of the air intake, line it back up with the air box. Make sure that goes over. It should fall right into place. Stick your 10mm headed bolt right through. Of course, for me, I have to hold the mounting nut on the bottom side. I'm going to hold it with a wrench, snug this up. Don't make it too tight, you don't want to break it. And let's do the same to this side. Snug it up. Let's put this piece back. Once you line it up, put all the push clips back in, snap them down and lock them in. Now it's time to fill the cooling system. I have the spill-proof funnel that I'm going to use. That way, not only do I not spill all over the place, but this now becomes the highest point in the cooling system, and it is easier to bleed the cooling system naturally, as in without the engine running. I'm going to put coolant in this funnel until it stops bubbling out. That means the air has come out of the system, or at least most of it, and then we'll run the vehicle. If you're unsure of what coolant to use, make sure you check your owner's manual and go by the manufacturer's recommended coolant type. Now that it stopped bubbling, let's turn on the engine, let it warm up. As it warms up, the water pump will circulate the coolant through the system. It'll push the air out and suck more coolant in. When the thermostat opens, because it reaches operating temperature, it'll let even more flow through. So let's turn on the engine and let it run. As the engine warms up, we're going to want the heat all the way on high and the blower on low. And I'm going to set it so it can blow on the vents. That way I can feel the heat coming through. I'm also going to pay attention to the temperature gauge and make sure this doesn't overheat. It shouldn't, but if there's an air pocket somewhere in the system that it hasn't bled out yet, it might. So make sure it doesn't go past the halfway point. As you can see right now, it's bubbling, which means the water pump is doing its job. It's pushing the air out and pulling the coolant in. Now that everything warmed up, the fan's turned on, I turned off the engine, let it cool down. As you can see, it pulled in quite a bit of the coolant that I had in here. Now that I have this funnel here, I can squeeze the upper radiator hose just a little bit, plug up the funnel, and let go of the radiator hose as I remove this. That's actually going to make this so I can take it off without spilling anything. And I'm going to put the rest of this right in the overflow tank, which mine is almost full, but you want to make sure it's full to the full mark. That way it can have coolant to pull in when it needs to. Now take this off if you used it, and put back your regular radiator cap. And then of course, you're going to want to start it up, take it for a road test. Now that the job is complete, you're going to want to test drive the vehicle. And of course, since we removed the AC refrigerant, you're going to want to have it professionally refilled. It is very important that the proper amount of refrigerant and PAG oil is in the system so everything can function. If you think you need to check your transmission fluid after this job, you'll notice that underneath the vehicle, next to the transmission oil pan, you have this 14mm drain plug that sits at an angle, kind of diagonal. And this is what you're going to want to remove in order to check the fluid. Now, you want to make sure that you are in park with the engine running on a flat level surface, preferably after having driven the vehicle so that the transmission fluid is at full operating temperature. Otherwise, you're going to have to let it idle for a while. And behind this drain plug is actually another piece that sticks up in there, and that's basically just a little overflow tube so that no fluid comes out as long as it's underneath that tube. So once you pull this out, which I won't do because my fluid is good and I don't want to lose any, and right now my vehicle is not running, so you definitely want to make sure it is running when you do this. And once you pull that out, you'll have that tube. Pull that out, then you can add fluid accordingly in order to fill it up. So basically, once you have it running, it's at operating temperature, you've gone through all the gears, you let it sit on a flat level surface with the engine running, and you add fluid until it starts dripping out. Once it starts dripping out, you know it's full, so plug it back up and make sure it's snug.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.